So, CSG in Sutton.
Thank you. All right. Now this is a separate presentation, so you've already learned about this, so we'll move forward. Click it forward. Keep going, you guys will learn about this. Go to, keep going. That's it, stop there. So that's a shortened version of what you guys just learned. You got the full version. Okay, all I've done here is that's the same floodplain. All I've done is I've added the rock strata below the floodplain. So remember, this is just deposited sediment. And I've done the blue colour because that's the ground table that sits within that deposited sediment. And then that's the rock below the ground. So that's the original surface, and that's all being deposited around 6. Okay, remember rock stratas under the ground usually run in lines, so you've got what might be an impermeable rock, which means a rock that water won't move into. So we will have maybe a layer of impermeable rock, then we could have a layer of permeable rock, something like sandstone, or it could be gravel, or it could be anything that water can infiltrate and percolate through, and that creates an aquifer. Now please see the difference between an aquifer. It runs within the rock strata. The ground table just sits within the deposited sediment of the floodplain. Okay, so they are separated. And they're separated with this impermeable rock layer. Okay, then you might have another impermeable rock layer, then another aquifer, then a coal seam, and then another aquifer, and so it goes on. Now that's just me coming up with any concept. There's many ways it's going to look under the ground, but that's as reasonable as any I could come up with. Okay, what you've got now is, remember, most of the time the coal seam gas like to go onto level areas. It's much cheaper to set up infrastructure if you have fairly level ground. So floodplains are fairly light by the coal seam gas company. So basically what they do is they send down their pipes down. They're wanting to send them down into the coal seams. They also have these horizontal pipes that run off, and that gives them more access into the coal seam. Okay, go to the next one. What they do then is they pump huge volumes of water mixed with sand and also mixed with an array of chemicals, hundreds of different types of chemicals, of which we know very few. They have told us some of their chemicals, but most of their chemicals they consider to be a trade secret, a bit like McDonald's secret sauce. So even the government and the authorities do not know what chemicals they're using. And the few they tell us are pretty bad. I hate to think of the ones they're not telling us about. Okay, so what they do is under huge pressure, that water, sand and chemicals is pumped down into the coal seam, and the pressure of that causes the coal seam to crack. And basically they need the coal seam to crack because that gas is actually held within the coal seam, like within bubbles within the coal seam. So you've got to crack the coal seam open to allow the gas to then percolate down into the pipe and back up. The problem they've got though is that this coal seam gas is often full of, the coal seam itself is often full of water. But even if it's not, as soon as you crack the coal seam, the water from the upper aquifer begins to percolate down into where they're pumping. So now I've got water coming in from the top aquifer, coming right where they want to get the gas. So in order to get the gas, they now have to pump out the water and then separate the gas from the water. As long as they keep doing that, they've got to continually pump the water out. Go to the next one. If you keep pumping the water, you end up losing pressure in these aquifers. Remember, the aquifer is probably filled on the other side of this hill. The aquifer probably exists up there, and it's rain events up here that cause the aquifer to fill down here. But because we're pumping the water out of the ground and the water keeps infiltrating in, we keep pumping it out, eventually the water pressure gets so low that the salt water from the floodplain can begin to infiltrate into that aquifer. And if you have a look at the when they start testing the coal seam water, or the water that they're getting out of the coal seam mine, originally it's quite fresh. Then over time it gets saltier and saltier and saltier, and this is the reason. Originally it's just the fresh water seeping in, but then once I lose pressure, it's that disgusting salt water from the floodplain. Remember, that salt water is not just the farmers' fertilisers, it's however many years of farmers' chemicals, fertilisers, all of the farmers' waste that has settled and seeped into his land is now sitting at the bottom of his floodplain. So we're talking very toxic, putrid water. And it can have a salt level of up to about 30,000, which is almost as salty as the ocean. So it's a total biocide. Okay, it is now filtering into this area. It is now being sucked up. Go to the next one. And as they keep pumping the water out, the salt water now infiltrates in through these cracks and starts infiltrating down into the lower aquifers as well. So where we had perfect, fresh, perfectly clear water is pretty much now farm effluent coming from the floodplain. And that is now infiltrating into it. And that is the water that they're sucking up. And now they're separating. That water is coming out with huge amounts of salts, huge amounts of chemicals, and all that, and there is actually no current method for dealing with that waste. And I've got a few statistics a bit later on to just tell you how much waste we're talking about, but it'll blow your mind. But keep in mind that all the statistics I'll present to you are only referring to the water that they suck out and then they have to deal with. It's not referring to any of this water that now exists in the aquifers, this polluted water. And it's not only got the farm pollutants, the salt, it's now also got the fracking chemicals in it as well, whatever they're using down there as well. So I'm now talking about highly toxic polluted water. That water is now moving through our aquifers. And if you were to look at this, remember these are all, this would move through a layer of rock. So that layer of rock would be moving forward. So this aquifer is flowing in this direction, this aquifer is flowing in this direction. And if the hill comes down like this, eventually that aquifer is going to exit the ground and it'll create a spring. That spring could exit the ground, it could be in a wetland, it could be in a farming valley, it could be in a haven swamp. We don't know where that spring is going to exit. Wherever that spring exits, it's going to be draining this toxic water from the floodplain. It could exit 500 kilometres away from the coal seam gas line. That is the problem. They can't say it's your fault because they can't tell you. These underground systems are so complicated and virtually impossible to work out where it's coming from. But I can tell you now they are finding all over the country around coal seam gas areas salt water leaking from the ground. They're finding it leaking into the rivers. They're finding it just popping out of the ground in springs, and that is the reason. And it'll continue to go as long as this water is here to drain away. So I'm talking about trillions and trillions of megalitres of water that is just basically exiting the landscape, and where it is exiting, if it's a farming valley, it will destroy that entire farming valley. If it's a natural woodland, it will destroy the entire forest. If it's a wetland or a hanging swamp, you can well imagine what it will do. So I'm talking about massive landscape destruction on a scale that we have yet to see, and we've already turned half the country into a salt desert. So just keep that in mind, because when I tell you about the statistics of what's happening up to the water they know about, I can tell you this is 100 times worse and nobody is even looking at it. No one has even thought to look at it. And everyone's wondering why the salt's coming out of the ground. That is why the salt's coming out of the ground. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, that's it. Alright, does that make some sense? Do you start to see how serious the problem is? Because not only is that, can you go back, just flip back to there. Stop, yeah, that'll do. Okay, not only are we losing this ground table and it's exiting and destroying up some landscape somewhere, but now if I go to repair that valley, so I can weir that channel, I can now fill that channel up with water, it'll now fill the floodplain up, but it'll just drain away again. Because we've now broken the seal in the floodplain. So now, after the coal seam gas lines have been there, we can't even go in and fix it. It is now stuffed forever. Okay? And basically wherever this water comes out is also stuffed forever because the amount of salt and toxins in that water is unbelievable. And if you have a look at, you know, the Great Artesian Basin, if you have a look at the, go on Google Earth and flip down on but then we'll build on the landscape. Now because these pipes also trap that sealed rock, the salt water is leaking down into the aquifers below the Great Artesian Basin and is now spewing out of the ground. We have rivers of salt water spewing out of the ground where it used to be rivers of fresh water spewing out of the ground. So, and what they're saying is that the water in this aquifer is there for tens of thousands of years. It's not. Because if you have a look at the Google Earth, you'll notice that there's a massive set of rivers that come out at the end of the Great Artesian Basin. And the Great Artesian Basin, the water exits the ground quick enough to keep these massive systems flowing. So the water moves very quickly through the aquifers, not as slow as they believe. And that's why we're seeing the salt very quickly exit the ground after the coal seam gas guys have been there. Okay, can I just give you some statistics? This is the end of it. I'm not very good with statistics, so